For a second lesson, words also of the Apostle Paul to his friends in Philippi. My friends, I do not consider myself to have arrived spiritually, nor do I consider myself already perfect. But I go on grasping ever more firmly the purpose for which Christ has grasped me. I do concentrate on this, forgetting what lies behind, and with hands outstretched to whatever lies ahead, I go straight for the goal. My reward, the honor of being called by God in Christ. Let us bow together for a moment. O God, in the activities and busyness of this season, grant us a moment, a part of quiet and availability to a word above all the words of this world, a word which may be to us strength and hope and life. In the Spirit of Jesus, Amen. Well, have you demolished Big Bird for another year? As I wrote those words, it occurred to me that the reference to Big Bird would be totally misunderstood by my grandchildren. Disastrously misunderstood. Someone has said that the optimist is the man who asks his wife on the Friday after, "Hun, what's for lunch?" On the second day of turkey, my true love brought to me turkey omelet, turkey loaf, and turkey soup. One of the wonders of modern physics is how we get 24 pounds of leftovers out of a 15-pound bird. Irma Bombeck comments, though, that her mother was of an entirely different breed. She says that for 30 years, her mother served the family nothing but leftovers. The original meal has never been found. But all such nonsense aside, one of the greatest plagues of life for you and me is our tendency to live on the leftovers of yesterday rather than the fresh food of today. Interesting question. If you could do an inventory of your thoughts, where would you find yourself spending most of the time? Up here. In eager anticipation and hopes for tomorrow, in the enthusiasm and joys of today, or in the regrets and hurts of yesterday? Now, of course, there are memories of yesterday where we may fruitfully spend a few fine hours now and then, memories of the gifts that have come our way in life, memories of the moments when our life was graced with love and joy, memories of the goodness of God and others for which we shall remain grateful, and from that gratitude draw new energy and the desire to live and share. One man writes, "Picture this, a stretch of tall sycamore trees on a country road, a sudden extravagance of shade in a hot, hard-working farmland. Picture this, that grandfather of mine, a stern attorney at law, yet a man so gentle of spirit that it came naturally for him to think of a tired old workhorse's comfort before his own. Picture this, a full day with that grandfather at the Edgar County Fair, races and rides and hot dogs and gaudy lights. Gentle fragments of the past, we all have such memories. I call mine whatsoever things because they are lovely and honest and true, and Paul has told us that we should think on these things, and I do. Often when I'm deeply troubled or sad, I'll reach down into the storehouse of memory and hold up a whatsoever thing in my mind, letting it shimmer there until I can feel the beauty of life again. And how much better it is to remember such things than to dream, for dreams are spun of gossamer and memories are spun of reality. I suppose Thanksgiving has for many of us been an exercise in precisely that kind of good memories. Faith itself is a matter of good memories. Do this remembering me, asks Jesus. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you, writes the apostle to his friends. But the characteristic of good memories is that they do not bind us to the past. They do not haunt us and plague us and clutter the duties of today and the plans for tomorrow. They, in fact, liberate and inspire us back into now. They bless us and enable us to get on with life. So memory is important, but take heart, because a certain kind of forgetfulness is also very important. The older I grow, the more I'm comforted by that reality. Forgetfulness of those parts of our past that do bind us, that do imprison. The hurts of yesterday, hurts done to us that hang around the corners of the mind, no matter how hard we try to concentrate, that haunt the night hours, the feelings of anger or injustice or disappointment or abandonment, the rage that settles into an abiding resentment. I have at times lamented the fact that we Americans have a deficiency of historical memory. But I've begun to believe lately that there's an upside to this. I read recently the account of one man who has spent some time in Bosnia with the Serbs, and he is astounded at the passions that have set simple neighbor against neighbor, and how rooted they are in a memory passed down from 4 centuries ago, when the Serbs saw themselves as defenders of Christendom against the Ottoman Empire. And today, they see themselves unjustly maligned and misunderstood as they continue that passionate, same centuries-old battle against the infidels. Historical memory can be demonic. But persons, as well as nations, can get caught up in past battles, past offense. Let it infect and even destroy real life in present and future. There's a story told as true about 2 brothers in a small Pennsylvania town. Having once lived in such a small town, I can believe it is true. They owned and ran a small general store together, a store typical of that time many years ago. They worked together as good brothers, catering to familiar customers, keeping the books, stocking the storeroom, doing inventory, until one fateful day. One of the brothers, about to put a $10 bill into the cash register, saw a customer up front, laid the bill on the register, and went to serve the customer. The other brother was busy, off behind a counter in another corner. After assisting the customer, the first brother came back to the register and found the $10 bill missing. He immediately accosted his brother. "What did you do with the bill?" "I didn't do anything with it." "You must have. I left it right here." "I didn't see your bill." Faces reddened, anger flashed, accusation followed accusation. In a white heat, the first stormed out of the store, the second locked up and followed. The next morning, the accused brother found the other marking a line down the middle of the floor of the store. He'd already divided the stock and refused to speak. And for 20 years thereafter, 2 brothers operated their store as if the other did not exist and spoke not one word to each other. Only after 20 years did a well-dressed, pleasant-appearing stranger appear to confess to them how many years before, down and out, he'd been passing through the alley behind the store and, desperate for food, had spied the bill through an open door, slipped in quietly, and had taken it. He'd come to make restitution because his conscience had bothered him all these years. Living on leftovers, stuck in the past, imprisoned in yesterday, 20 years of life lost in large measure. Very unusual, isn't it? But it does happen. I know a woman in another parish, divorced now for many, many years, fine new husband and children, but on occasion she still talks about the man who left her, and as she talks, the bitterness and resentment still so close to the surface well up like a flood taking her over. The memories still control, sour, subtly infect her life even today. And I still remember an encounter at church door a long time ago, brief encounter. I'd spoken of forgiveness that day. The man with a dark look on his face began to speak impulsively, somewhat to the embarrassment of those who were waiting. "You know, Gil, as you talked, I realized I have never forgiven one of my sons. He refused to come to work with us and left us, and I've not seen or talked to him to this day. He disappointed me so. And for all your talk, I'm not sure I can forgive him even now." And with that, he turned and walked out, still full of anger and hurt, a large part of his spirit way back there in the past, living on leftovers. Now, I doubt that most of us are caught in such intense situations, but in small and insidious ways, their problem is ours as well. Life together involves rubbing against one another in ways that hurt or offend or disappoint, and the result is inevitable. Injured pride, feelings of abandonment, sense of injustice, anger, resentment, feelings that cloud and infect our relationships, all tied to events of yesterday that spoil life today. The smallest word or act on the part of another human being can so lock into us that it means a bad night and maybe a bad tomorrow. John and Denise had gone to a dinner party. During the course of the evening, John had ignored his wife and snapped at her when she asked him to leave early, generally did not behave very well, and when she finally got him in the car, she called him on it, and he bridled, and a bitter argument ensued until finally John, incensed at what he considered her unfairness, shouted, "Stop the car, I'm getting out." Whereupon Denise, who was driving, stopped the car. John opened the door, got out, and began to walk away. Quickly realized, however, that they'd been driving along the edge of a scary neighborhood noted for drugs, violence, crime. He looked around and thought he saw ominous shadows. Panic-stricken, he called out to Denise, who had begun to pull away, "Stop the car! Stop the car!" When he got back in, he said, "Take me to a better neighborhood." Fortunately, their sense of humor and ensuing laughter rather put the spat in a better perspective and freed them to live together for another day. But unfortunately, there's often nothing very humorous to liberate us. So what does it? Forgiveness does it. Put away from you all bitterness and wrath and anger, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. That sounds nice, doesn't it? But what does it mean and how do we pull it off? Give me another word for it. Forgiveness. Excuse? No way. Excuse and excusing means to dismiss the offense as unimportant, to make light of the hurt, to act as if there had been no violation of relationship and person, no real injustice. Note, first of all, that Paul is asking this of members of a community who are bound together and who want to preserve their life together. He's not talking about, in the first instance, injury by strangers or violation of civil law. And in this context, forgiveness means one thing. It means letting in, letting back in, acceptance of the other in spite of the injury and hurt. It means hanging in there with the other in spite of the problem. Now, of course, this can happen only where both parties are clear that there has been violation of the relationship. Injury has occurred. But when there is acknowledgement of the harm that's been done, then forgiveness means the willingness to stay with and in the relationship, means acceptance of the other, means letting in. And that's the way of forgiveness in real relationships of marriage or family or friendship. As I tell the young people before the altar here every Saturday afternoon almost, forgiveness means to embrace the other on days when they are lovable. It means to embrace them on days when they are not so lovable. But what about the wrong done to me that is now history? What about when there is no longer the possibility of letting in? What about the wrong done to me by those with whom I bump elbows at work or on the street? And how about violation of my person by the stranger? How can forgiveness mean letting in where there's no possibility of relationship? Here I think forgiveness takes another form. Forgiveness here means letting go. Not acceptance of the other, but letting go of the past in order to get on with the life that God still has for us and calls us to. In neither case is forgiveness something easily done with a flip of a switch. Forgiveness as letting in involves encounter and mutual understanding of what has happened. Forgiveness as letting go involves an internal struggle in which we shake loose of the domination of yesterday. But in both cases, It involves the refusal to let the past imprison us, dominate heart and mind this new day. It means the struggle to be free again. In Mennonite circles up in Canada, a story is told of a woman whose daughter was abducted, raped, and murdered. And to this day, they have never found the person who committed the crime. Yet this mother has learned how to speak about her feelings and about forgiveness, trying to be helpful to others. She talks about her fantasies of finding this criminal, of shooting him, of seeing his blood, of crying out in her rage. But then she also talks about letting go of all that, slowly and painfully letting go of all that, of her anger and the power that the criminal has over her life. But it doesn't happen easily and just once. This mother says that every year of the anniversary of her daughter's death, she must go through the process she finds all over again. She says that forgiveness is not a simple act. It's a process, a way of living, an attitude, a gift of grace, a refusal to let the past take over the present. And forgiving others is important, not only for their sake, but because we also need to forgive ourselves. And I suspect that sometimes the difficulty we have forgiving and accepting others is related to the difficulty that we have forgiving and accepting ourselves. We're inclined to hold the other up to judgment because we have done that so habitually with ourselves. When we make mistakes or fail, we may try to deny or minimize. We may insist that they're not so bad. But more likely, we turn punitive toward ourselves. Some of the anger we feel toward others may be quite deserved, but there's no doubt that some of it is deflected anger. We see in them something that we find very difficult to tolerate in our own person. Psychologist J.A. Hadfield writes, "It is literally true that in judging others, we may trumpet abroad our own secret faults. Allow any man to give free vent to his feelings about others, and you can, in some safety, turn to him and say, 'Thou art the man.'" And again, what is the answer? Learn to forgive yourself, and in both senses of the word. Accept yourself, embrace yourself for all your faults and flaws. You're still a worthwhile human being, loved by God as much as anyone else, and capable of great gifts to life. And let go of the past that you may live again. We spend so much time and energy bemoaning and berating a past that we cannot change and that does not exist. We relive it over and over again in our heads rather than let it go for the reality it is, the past that is gone. I think this is what Paul is talking about when he says, you were taught to put away your former ways and to clothe yourselves with your new self. And he's not talking about something done once and for all, but something that his Christian friends still need to do. Something that needs doing with every nightfall and every sunrise. There's a story by Arthur Gordon, New York author, that catches the spirit in a marvelous way, I think. Arthur sat of a wintry afternoon in a Manhattan restaurant feeling frustrated and depressed. He was waiting for an elderly friend, a prospect which also failed to cheer him up. The friend came and they went together to the friend's office. An eminent psychiatrist. He was in his 80s and still carrying a full caseload. "Well, young man, what's troubling you?" So I proceeded to tell him at some length just what was bothering me. I was utterly ruthless. I blamed no one else but myself for my disappointment, only myself. The old man took out a cassette and inserted it into a tape machine and said, "On this tape are 3 short recordings made by 3 persons who have come to me for help. And I want you to listen and see if you can pick out the 2-word phrase common to all 3 cases." What I heard in all 3 cases was a lot of unhappiness. The first man spoke of some kind of business failure and berated himself for not having worked harder. The woman who spoke next was bitter because of the fact that out of obligations to her mother, she had never lived a full life, and she blamed herself. The third voice belonged to a mother whose teenage son was in trouble, and she blamed herself endlessly. The old man switched off the machine and leaned back in the chair. 6 times on this tape, a phrase is heard that is full of subtle poison. Did you spot it? No, I responded. Well, perhaps that's because you used it 3 times yourself down in the restaurant. He picked up the cassette and tossed it to me. They're right there on the label, the 2 saddest words in any language. And I looked down, and printed neatly in red ink were the words, "If only." "You'd be amazed," said the old man, "if you knew how many thousands of times I've sat in this chair and listened to woeful sentences beginning with those 2 words. If only I had done it differently, or not done it at all. If only I hadn't lost my temper, or said the cruel thing, or made the dishonest move, or told the stupid lie. If only I'd been wiser, more unselfish, more self-controlled." The old man stretched out his legs. The trouble with "if only" is that it doesn't change a thing, and it keeps you facing the wrong direction, backward instead of forward, and it wastes time and energy. And in the end, if you let it become a habit, it can become a real roadblock, an excuse for never trying again. The remedy, I ask? Shift the focus, change the key word, substitute a phrase that supplies lift instead of creating drag. Strike out "if only" and substitute the words "next time." Strike out the words "if only" and substitute the words "next time." To which I would only add the word of our faith, the word of the holiday coming, next time with God. For what finally enables us to forgive ourselves and the other is the ultimate word that comes to us in Jesus of Nazareth, the word that God is still with us today, no matter what happened yesterday, and that we are accepted and embraced and empowered by Him on days good and days bad. And as we acknowledge our humanness and our mistakes and our failures, He wipes them out. He remembers them no more, says the psalmist. The past no longer exists with God, and therefore it does not exist in reality, and therefore it need no longer exist in our heads. Yesterday really is gone, and we're free to get up with each new day and go at it again. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgives you. Sir William Osler, the great and beloved physician, father, in fact, of modern medicine, wrote, "At night I lay aside my clothes, and I undress my soul as well, and lay aside my mistakes and failures. And in the presence of a forgiving God, I lie down to rest, to awaken a free man with a new life." And it's a great way to go, not having to live on yesterday's leftovers all your life, but starting with a clean plate each new day.